Jake Thompson stood at the homecoming dance podium, the gymnasium lights casting long shadows across his 16-year-old face. The music had stopped. The crowd had gone silent. His hands trembled as he held the microphone, knowing these next words would change everything. "I'm gay." His voice cracked but carried. "And I'm proud of who I am." The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Then came the whispers, the stares, the pointing fingers. In Cedar Falls, Colorado, where Friday night football mattered more than acceptance, where tradition ran deeper than understanding, Jake Thompson had just painted a target on his back. Sheriff Tom Thompson watched from the gym entrance, his uniform wrinkled from a long shift. His son had just done something that took more courage than most adults possessed, but Tom also knew what came next. In a town where different meant dangerous, where being gay was still whispered like a curse, his boy had just made himself visible to all the wrong people. Marcus Rivera found Jake by the parking lot afterward, while other kids scattered like leaves in wind. Marcus stayed. He'd been Jake's secret for 3 months. Stolen kisses behind the auto shop. Text messages deleted as soon as they were sent. Love hidden in plain sight. "You didn't have to do that," Marcus whispered, his dark eyes filled with worry and admiration. "Not for me." Jake reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining under the Colorado stars. "Yes, I did. I'm tired of being afraid." 3 blocks away, the Prairie Wolves were planning their response. This white supremacist gang had infected Cedar Falls like a slow poison, spreading hate through coded language and midnight threats. Their leader, Garrett Stone, had been waiting for an opportunity. A gay sheriff's son was exactly the kind of weakness they could exploit. The first brick came through Jake's bedroom window on Monday night, glass scattered across his homework. A note wrapped around the stone reading, "Faggots get what they deserve." Tom found his son sweeping up the pieces, hands shaking but jaws set in determination. "Maybe you should stay with your aunt in Denver for a while," Tom suggested, though every word tasted like failure. "No." Jake's voice was steady now. "If I run, they win. If I hide, Marcus suffers alone. I'm staying." Tom looked at his son, seeing something he'd never noticed before. Beneath the fear lived an unbreakable steel. This kid wasn't just brave. He was revolutionary in a place that desperately needed revolution. The attacks escalated. Graffiti on their house, slashed tires, anonymous phone calls promising violence. The Prairie Wolves fed on fear, but Jake refused to give them what they wanted. He held Marcus's hand in the school hallway. He spoke up when kids used slurs. He became everything they tried to silence. Thursday night, Tom received the call that would end everything. Marcus had been found beaten unconscious behind the Walmart, his skull fractured, ribs broken, the word freak carved into his chest with a knife. The message was clear. This is what happens to those who love wrong. Jake sat in the hospital ICU, holding Marcus's hand through bandages and tubes. The machines beeped steadily, but Marcus wouldn't wake up. The doctor's words echoed in the sterile air. "Traumatic brain injury. We don't know if he'll recover." Tom investigated with a fury that surprised even him. The Prairie Wolves had been careful, but not careful enough. Security footage from a gas station showed Garrett Stone's truck speeding away from the scene. Witness testimony placed 3 gang members at the Walmart around the time of the attack. On Friday evening, Tom arranged the arrests. 6 Prairie Wolves taken into custody, including Stone. The gang was cornered, desperate, and dangerous. They'd lost their leader, but not their rage. Tom never saw the rifle barrel emerge from the darkness as he approached Stone's house for a 7th arrest. The bullet found him before the muzzle flash lit the night. Sheriff Tom Thompson died doing what he'd always done, protecting the people others wouldn't protect. Sometimes love demands a price that seems too high to pay. But in that moment, as Jake knelt beside his father's body, he understood something profound about courage. It wasn't about being unafraid. It was about loving something more than you feared losing it. The funeral home smelled of lilies and loss. Jake sat in the front row, staring at his father's closed casket, surrounded by empty chairs that should have been filled with family. Tom's parents had died years ago. His sister lived in Australia. The Thompsons had always been a small family, and now Jake was the only one left. The few police officers who attended kept their distance, not from disrespect, but from fear. The Prairie Wolves had made their position clear. Anyone showing support for the gay sheriff's son would face consequences. Cedar Falls had learned to look away when hate knocked on the door. Jake's hands trembled as he tried to write his father's eulogy. How do you capture a lifetime of love in words that won't crack under the weight of grief? How do you thank someone who died protecting your right to exist 3 miles away? Tank Rivera worked under the hood of a Harley-Davidson in the Iron Brotherhood clubhouse. His real name was Roberto, but nobody had called him that since the Army discharged him 15 years ago. Don't ask, don't tell had destroyed his military career, but it couldn't destroy who he was. The phone call came while his hands were buried in grease and chrome. Marcus was awake. Broken, but breathing, Tank dropped his wrench and ran to the hospital, his leather jacket flapping behind him like wings. Marcus looked smaller somehow, wrapped in white hospital linens with half his head shaved for surgery. But his eyes were alert, focused, alive. When he saw his older brother, he managed something that almost resembled a smile. "Jake," Marcus whispered through swollen lips. "Where's Jake?" Tank had avoided Jake Thompson for 3 months, ever since learning about his baby brother's secret relationship, not from homophobia, but from protective instinct. Loving a sheriff's son seemed like asking for trouble in a town where trouble found you regardless. But seeing Marcus now, seeing the love that had nearly cost his life, Tank understood something important. This wasn't about choosing sides. This was about family. He found Jake at the cemetery, standing over a fresh grave with flowers scattered in the wind. The kid looked like he'd aged 10 years in a week. His shoulders carried weight no teenager should bear. "You're Jake Thompson." Jake turned, taking in the massive biker approaching him. Tank Rivera was built like a mountain. Tattooed arms crossed over a broad chest, gray beard braided down to his sternum. Everything about him screamed dangerous, except his eyes, which held the same gentle sadness Jake saw in his own reflection. "You loved my brother." It wasn't a question. Tank had seen the way Marcus talked about this kid, the way his entire face changed when his phone buzzed with a certain notification sound. Love like that didn't hide, even when it tried to. Jake nodded, unable to trust his voice. These were the first words anyone had spoken to him about Marcus since the attack. Everyone else treated the relationship like a shameful secret, something to be ignored rather than acknowledged. "Marcus is awake," Tank said simply. "He's asking for you." The Iron Brotherhood clubhouse felt like walking into another world. Leather and chrome, the smell of motor oil and cigarettes, walls covered with photos of rides across the American Southwest. 20 men who looked like they could tear apart a town with their bare hands, all stopping their conversations to stare at the sheriff's son. Jake felt their eyes measuring him, weighing whether he was worth the trouble his presence would inevitably bring. These men knew about survival, about loyalty, about codes that mattered more than laws. They also knew about being unwanted. Tank led him to Marcus's bedside, then stepped back to give them privacy. Jake took Marcus's hand carefully, afraid of causing more pain, amazed by how alive it felt in his own. "I thought I lost you," Jake whispered. Marcus squeezed back, his grip stronger than expected. "You can't get rid of me that easy." They talked quietly for an hour while Tank watched from the doorway. He saw something in these boys that reminded him of himself at their age. The willingness to fight for love, even when the world demanded surrender. The refusal to apologize for existing. When visiting hours ended, Tank walked Jake to his truck. The kid looked exhausted, hollowed out by grief and fear and the impossible weight of being 16 in a hostile world. "Your father ditched him," Tank said carefully. "Marcus told me he was different from other cops." Jake stopped walking. "What do you mean? He never hassled us, never pulled us over for sport, treated us like human beings instead of problems to solve. Tank's voice carried old pain, old gratitude. Most cops see the colors and assume the worst. Your dad saw people. The story came out slowly. How Tom Thompson had once helped Tank change a flat tire in the rain, refusing payment and declining backup when dispatch offered it. How he'd given Tank's nephew a warning instead of an arrest for underage drinking, telling the kid to call his uncle instead of spending the night in jail. He was trying to protect you, Tank continued. Both of you, even after you came out. Even when it put him in danger, he kept fighting the prairie wolves. That takes guts. Jake felt something crack open in his chest. For weeks, he'd blamed himself for his father's death. If he hadn't come out, if he'd stayed hidden, if he'd been different somehow, maybe Tom would still be alive. It's not your fault, Tank said, reading his expression. Hate killed your father, not love. Don't let them convince you otherwise. Standing in that parking lot under stars that seemed too bright for grief, Jake realized something important. He wasn't as alone as he'd thought. Family didn't always share your blood. Sometimes it shared your burdens instead. Sometimes the people who understand your pain are the ones society taught you to fear. And sometimes, love builds bridges strong enough to hold the weight of healing. Tank Rivera had been kicked out of the Army on a Tuesday. 15 years later, he could still remember the taste of that morning's coffee, bitter and cold, while his commanding officer explained why his service no longer mattered. Don't ask, don't tell had caught up with him when someone reported seeing him kiss another man outside a base bar in Kansas. 12 years of exemplary service, 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star for valor in Afghanistan, all reduced to a single moment of being human. They'd stripped his rank, confiscated his benefits, and sent him home to Colorado with a discharge that made finding work nearly impossible. The Iron Brotherhood found him 6 months later, sleeping in his truck behind a truck stop outside Denver. These weren't the criminals the media portrayed. They were veterans, outcasts, men who'd been discarded by a society that demanded their service, but not their humanity. They offered him something the Army had taken away: belonging. Now, 15 years later, Tank stood before 23 of his brothers in their clubhouse meeting room. Cigarette smoke hung in the air like incense. The walls were covered with patches from motorcycle clubs across the country, memorials to fallen riders, and a single American flag that had been folded with military precision. The sheriff's kid needs our help, Tank said without preamble. His father's funeral is Saturday. Nobody's coming because the prairie wolves threatened anyone who shows support. Silence filled the room. These men understood persecution, but helping a cop's family cross lines that had been drawn in blood and circumstance, police had harassed them for decades, treating their leather jackets like gang colors, their brotherhood like criminal conspiracy. Why should we care? Asked Snake, a Vietnam veteran whose arms were covered in ink that told stories of battles both foreign and domestic. Cops ain't never done us any favors. Tank had expected this resistance. These weren't bad men, but they were careful ones. They'd learned that survival sometimes meant choosing who deserved their protection and who didn't. Tom Thompson wasn't like other cops, Tank said, his voice carrying across the room. He treated us like people, helped when he could have harassed, protected when he could have prosecuted. He told them about the flat tire, about the nephew's warning, about the dozen small kindnesses that had distinguished Tom Thompson from the uniform he wore. But more than that, he told them about Jake and Marcus, about love that had demanded courage in a place where courage meant target practice. That boy came out in front of his entire school, Tank continued. Knew what it would cost him, did it anyway. That's the kind of guts we respect in this room. Hammer, the club's treasurer, leaned back in his chair. What happens when the prairie wolves show up looking for trouble? Tank smiled without humor. Then we show them what trouble really looks like. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it didn't need to be. 18 members raised their hands in support. 5 abstained. None voted against. In the Iron Brotherhood, abstention meant respect for the majority, even when you couldn't participate yourself. Word spread through the biker community with the efficiency of wildfire. The Iron Brotherhood was riding for a fallen sheriff's gay son, not because they supported law enforcement, but because they supported justice, because they understood what it meant to be unwanted, unloved, unsupported by the very system they'd once served. By Thursday night, Tank's phone was ringing constantly. The road demons from Utah wanted in. The desert riders from New Mexico were already on their way. The Warriors Code from Kansas, a club composed entirely of LGBTQ veterans, was organizing an entire convoy. These weren't the stereotypical bikers Hollywood portrayed. These were teachers and mechanics, nurses and contractors, men and women who'd found family in chrome and leather when blood family had failed them. They understood rejection, discrimination, the weight of being different in a world that demanded conformity. Jake learned about their support on Friday afternoon when Tank called him to the hospital. Marcus was sitting up now, color returning to his face, though the bandages still covered most of his head. "They're coming," Tank said simply. "All of them. For your father. For you." Jake stared at him, not understanding. Who's coming? Brothers, sisters, people who know what it's like to fight for the right to exist. Tank's weathered face cracked into something resembling a smile. "Tomorrow you won't be alone." The magnitude of it hit Jake like a physical force. Strangers were riding hundreds of miles to honor his father, to stand with him against hate, to prove that family extended beyond blood and geography in the narrow definitions society offered. That night, Jake sat with Marcus in the hospital room, watching the parking lot fill with motorcycles. Riders were arriving early, setting up camps in the nearby state park, preparing for something that felt larger than a funeral. This felt like a declaration of war against hate itself. "I wish I could be there tomorrow," Marcus said, his voice still weak but determined. Jake squeezed his hand. "You will be. Every single bike that shows up carries a piece of you with it." Through the window, they could see Tank organizing the arriving riders, assigning parking areas, coordinating with local law enforcement to ensure everything stayed peaceful. He moved with military precision, a general preparing for a battle that would be won with presence rather than violence. The Prairie Wolves would expect fear, chaos, maybe a handful of mourners scared into silence. Instead, they would face something they'd never encountered: a community united not by geography or blood, but by the revolutionary idea that love deserved protection. Sometimes the most powerful resistance comes not from fighting against hate, but from standing so firmly in love that hate has nowhere to root itself. And sometimes the family you need finds you when you least expect it, riding into your life on motorcycles and carrying hope like a banner. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, with autumn wind cutting through the Colorado hills like a blade. Jake Thompson stood at his bedroom window, watching an impossible sight unfold in the streets below. Motorcycles stretched as far as he could see, their chrome catching what little sunlight leaked through the clouds. 250 riders had come to Cedar Falls. They filled the church parking lot, lined Main Street, clustered around the cemetery in formations that looked almost military in their precision. The Iron Brotherhood's patches mixed with colors from across the American West: desert riders, mountain warriors, freedom's call, the warrior's code. Tank Rivera stood in the center of it all, his presence commanding without being loud. He'd been awake since 4 in the morning, coordinating with local police, establishing perimeters, ensuring that this show of support wouldn't become the violence the Prairie Wolves were hoping for. The service itself was simple. Jake had written his father's eulogy in halting sentences, words that carried the weight of 16 years of love and 3 days of grief. When he stood at the podium, looking out at a church filled with leather and chrome instead of empty pews, his voice didn't shake. "My father believed that protecting people meant protecting all people," Jake said, his words carrying to the very back of the sanctuary. "He taught me that courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about doing what's right even when you're terrified." The bikers listened in absolute silence. Many had removed their colors out of respect for the sacred space. Some wiped tears from weathered cheeks as Jake spoke about Tom Thompson's quiet heroism, his refusal to let hate win in his town, his ultimate sacrifice for love itself. After the service, the procession to Riverside Cemetery stretched for miles. Every motorcycle engine created a thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of Cedar Falls. Citizens lined the streets, some in support, others in shock at the sight of their small town transformed into something larger than itself. The prairie wolves were waiting at the cemetery gates. Garrett Stone had been released on bail pending trial for Marcus's assault. He stood with 12 other gang members beside their pickup trucks, assault rifles visible in their truck beds, their intention clear. They hadn't come to pay respects. They'd come to finish what they'd started. Tank saw them first, his military training immediately assessing the threat. He raised one hand, and 250 motorcycles fell silent simultaneously. The only sound was wind through the cemetery trees and the distant rumble of truck engines. "Problem?" Tank asked, dismounting his Harley and walking toward the armed men. He moved slowly, hands visible, projecting calm authority rather than aggression. Stone stepped forward, his rifle held across his chest in a gesture that was technically legal but unmistakably threatening. "This is a private matter. You boys don't belong here." "Actually, Thor," Tank replied, his voice carrying to both groups. "We belong exactly where we choose to be, just like that kid has the right to bury his father without fear." The standoff stretched like a held breath, two philosophies facing each other across a cemetery driveway, hate armed with weapons, love armed with numbers. The bikers didn't reach for guns because they didn't need to. Their presence alone was weapon enough. Jake stepped forward from behind the hearse, his young face set in determination that aged him beyond his 16 years. "I have something to say." Both groups turned toward him. This kid, who'd started everything with 4 words at a homecoming dance, who'd lost his boyfriend to violence and his father to hate, who had every reason to hide but chose visibility instead. 3 weeks ago, I told my town who I am. I knew some people wouldn't like it. I knew it would be difficult. But I did it because my father taught me that truth matters more than comfort. His voice grew stronger with each word. He died protecting that truth, protecting me, protecting the idea that love is stronger than hate. Stone shifted his rifle, clearly uncomfortable with being lectured by a teenager. But Jake wasn't finished. "You can threaten me, you can hurt me, you can even kill me, but you can't make me ashamed of who I am. You can't make love wrong." Jake looked directly at Stone. "And you can't stop other people from standing with love instead of fear." The silence that followed was electric. Then, one by one, the bikers began removing their helmets. 250 faces revealed. No longer anonymous. No longer hidden. These were teachers and veterans, mechanics and nurses, fathers and mothers, people who'd ridden across states to stand with a kid they'd never met. Stone looked around, suddenly aware that his 12 men were dramatically outnumbered by people who weren't backing down. His rifle, which had seemed so powerful moments before, now felt inadequate against the weight of collective courage. "This isn't over," he muttered, but the words lacked conviction. He gestured to his men, and they began backing toward their trucks. Weapons lowered but ready. Tank watched them leave, then turned back to Jake. "You ready to say goodbye to your father?" The burial was everything Tom Thompson deserved. Bikers formed an honor guard around the gravesite, Tank drawing on his military experience. Led a salute that included veterans from 4 decades of American conflicts. When Jake placed his hand on his father's casket for the last time, he wasn't alone. As the ceremony concluded, Tank approached Jake one final time. "What happens now?" Jake looked around at the faces that had become family in the space of a morning. "Now we keep fighting. Together." The prairie wolves drove away that day, but their hate didn't disappear. It rarely does. But something else had been proven in that cemetery: that love, when it finds community, becomes unstoppable. That standing together transforms individual courage into collective power. That family chooses itself, regardless of blood or geography or the narrow definitions society offers. Sometimes the most important battles aren't won with weapons, but with presence. And sometimes the love we're afraid to show becomes the very thing that saves us. 3 months after the funeral, Jake Thompson sat in Tank Rivera's living room, reading a letter that would change his understanding of everything. The envelope had been hidden in his father's desk, marked with instructions to be opened only after Tom's death. The handwriting was familiar, but the words inside revealed secrets Jake had never imagined. Son, so if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I need you to know that I've been investigating the Prairie Wolves for 18 months. Not just their harassment of you and Marcus, but their connections to a larger network of hate groups across Colorado. Jake's hands trembled as he continued reading. His father had been building a federal case, working with FBI agents in Denver, documenting everything from weapons trafficking to planned attacks on LGBTQ youth across the state. The Prairie Wolves hadn't killed Tom because he was protecting his gay son. They'd killed him because he was about to expose their entire operation. I know this is a lot to process, but I need you to understand something important. Being your father has been the greatest privilege of my life. Watching you find the courage to be yourself, even when it scared me, taught me more about heroism than 20 years in law enforcement ever could. Tank read over Jake's shoulder, his weathered face growing thoughtful. He'd suspected there was more to Tom Thompson's death than simple hate. Cops didn't usually get assassinated for family matters, but investigating white supremacist networks, that was the kind of work that got you killed. There's more, Jake whispered, turning the page. If something happens to me, I want you to find Roberto Rivera. I know that might sound strange, but Tank is a good man who understands what it means to be cast out by systems that should protect you. More importantly, he loves his brother the same way I love my son. He'll take care of you. Jake looked up at Tank, seeing him differently now. He planned this. He knew you'd take me in. Tank was quiet for a long moment, processing the weight of Tom's trust. Your father saw something I didn't see in myself. Maybe he understood that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when everything falls apart. The adoption papers had already been filed. Jake's aunt in Australia had signed away her rights, acknowledging that Tank could provide something she couldn't understanding. The Iron Brotherhood had become Jake's family by choice rather than chance. Marcus was walking again, his physical therapy progressing faster than doctors had predicted. The scars would always be there, visible reminders of hate's capacity for violence, but they were healing. More importantly, his spirit remained unbroken. He'd started speaking at high schools across Colorado, telling his story to kids who needed to hear that survival was possible. The Prairie Wolves had been dismantled through Tom's investigation. Garrett Stone was serving 25 years for assault and weapons charges. His followers had scattered or been arrested. The network they'd built through fear had crumbled when confronted with actual consequences. But Jake's real victory wasn't in their defeat. It was in what had been built from their ashes. The Tom Thompson Foundation for LGBTQ Youth Safety launched 6 months after the funeral, funded by donations from motorcycle clubs across America. $50,000 in the first month, growing to nearly $200,000 by year's end. The money went to crisis counseling, emergency housing, legal support for kids rejected by their families. Jake had become the foundation's spokesperson, not because he sought attention, but because his voice carried weight. When a 16-year-old who'd survived assassination attempts and family loss spoke about hope, people listened, standing before Congress on the foundation's first anniversary. Jake looked older than 17, but felt stronger than he'd ever imagined possible. The room was filled with representatives who'd probably never met an openly gay teenager, let alone one who'd been shaped by violence into an advocate for peace. Hate taught me that love requires courage, Jake said, his voice steady in the marble chamber. It taught me that family comes in forms we don't expect. It taught me that standing up for who you are sometimes means standing alone until others find the strength to stand with you. He paused, seeing Tank in the gallery above, Marcus beside him, dozens of bikers who'd become uncles and aunts and chosen family. But mostly, hate taught me that it's no match for people who refuse to be afraid of love. The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes, not because politicians were required to clap, but because something true had been spoken in a place where truth was often negotiable. That evening, Jake called Marcus from his hotel room in Washington. They talked for an hour about everything and nothing: college applications, motorcycle maintenance, the strange reality of their lives becoming larger than themselves. "Do you ever wonder how different things would be if you hadn't come out that night?" Marcus asked. Jake considered this. If he'd stayed hidden, his father might still be alive. The prairie wolves might still be operating. Marcus might never have been attacked. But dozens of kids across Colorado wouldn't have found hope in their story. "I think about it sometimes," Jake admitted. "But then I remember that hiding never protects anyone. It just makes the world a little darker for everyone who comes after us." Through his hotel window, Jake could see the Capitol dome lit against the night sky. Tomorrow, he'd fly home to Colorado, to the ranch he now shared with Tank, to the life they'd built from the pieces of tragedy. Have you ever wondered what would have happened if Jake had chosen silence over truth, safety over authenticity? His story reminds us that courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about choosing love even when hate seems stronger. Sometimes the family we need isn't the one we're born into, but the one that chooses us when we're brave enough to be ourselves. If Jake's journey moved you, please subscribe to Heart Stories for more tales of love overcoming fear, of chosen family, and of the extraordinary courage found in ordinary people who refuse to let hate have the final word.